I pulled my truck into Pine Hollow just as the afternoon sun began its descent behind the ridgeline. The drive had taken me 6 hours through increasingly narrow mountain roads, each turn taking me deeper into the Appalachian wilderness, further from anything resembling civilization. The last gas station had been 40 miles back. The last cell tower probably 60. My name is Tyler Bishop. I'm 33 years old, and until 3 months ago, I'd been working at Thornton Mill in eastern Tennessee. 15 years of steady work, decent pay, health insurance. Then the corporate buyout came, followed by the restructuring, followed by 240 people losing their jobs in a single afternoon. I was one of them. The offer from Willard Lawson came through a friend of a friend, the kind of word-of-mouth opportunity that doesn't get posted online. Remote logging work in the mountains. Good pay. Housing provided. Long-term contract if things worked out. I didn't ask too many questions. When you're 3 months behind on rent and your savings account is bleeding out, you don't have the luxury of being picky. The camp itself was smaller than I'd expected. 5 cabins arranged in a loose semicircle around a larger building that served as the mess hall and office. Beyond that, equipment sheds, a generator house, and stacks of cut timber waiting for transport. The place had that lived-in, semi-permanent look of a camp that had been there for years but could be packed up and gone in a week if needed. The forest pressed in on all sides. Dense pine mostly with oak and hickory mixed in. The kind of old-growth timber that made my logger's heart beat a little faster. These trees were worth money. Real money. But there was something about the way they stood, so close together, so uniformly dark even in daylight, that made the hair on my arms stand up. Willard was waiting for me outside the office. He was exactly what you'd picture when you thought mountain foreman, mid-60s, weathered face, flannel shirt, work boots that had seen a decade of use. His handshake was firm but brief. Tyler Bishop? Yes, sir. Good to meet you. Likewise. Drive okay. Long but fine. He nodded, already turning toward the office. Come on. We'll get your paperwork sorted, then I'll show you to your cabin. The office was Spartan. A desk, filing cabinets, a propane heater in the corner, and a large topographical map of the surrounding area pinned to one wall. Willard pulled out a standard employment contract, tax forms, safety waivers. I'd signed versions of these documents 100 times before. But then he pulled out something else. It was a single sheet of paper, slightly yellowed, with typewritten text. At the top, in all caps, operational guidelines. What's this? I asked. Rules, Willard said simply. You follow these, you'll do fine here. Break them and you're on your own. I scanned the list. Rule 1. Never go into the eastern forest after dusk. Rule 2. If you hear a whistle in the night, do not answer. Rule 3. Always clear your axe at the end of the day, do not leave it hanging from a tree. Rule 4. If a tree falls without a sound, leave the area immediately. Rule 5. You must return to the camp by 7 p.m. No exceptions. I read through them twice, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I looked up at Willard. He was watching me with an expression that was difficult to read, not quite serious, not quite joking. Is this some kind of hazing thing? I asked. For the new guy? No. These rules are pretty specific. They are. Any particular reason for them? Willard leaned back in his chair. Let's just say this place has its quirks. Follow the rules and you won't have any problems. That's all you need to know. I wanted to push back, to ask more questions, but something in his tone told me the conversation was over. Besides, the rules weren't asking me to do anything dangerous or unreasonable. Don't wander into certain areas after dark. Don't leave equipment unsecured. Be back by 7. Standard safety protocols, really just dressed up in strange language. All right, I said, signing my name at the bottom of the page. I can follow rules. Good. Willard showed me to cabin 3, a small but well-maintained structure with a wood stove, a single bed, a table, and not much else. He told me work started at dawn, gave me a quick orientation on where to find meals and supplies, and left me to settle in. That first evening, I sat on the cabin's small porch and watched the sun disappear behind the mountains. The forest grew darker quickly, not the gradual dimming of sunset, but an almost aggressive consumption of light. Within 20 minutes of the sun touching the ridgeline, the woods were pitch black. And then came the silence. I'd worked in remote areas before. I'd camped in the wilderness. I was familiar with the sounds of nature at night, crickets, owls, the rustle of small animals moving through underbrush. But this was different. This was the absence of sound. A silence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. I went inside, lit the wood stove, and tried not to think about how far I was from anywhere else. Tried not to think about Rule 1, about the eastern forest, about what might be out there that would make a man like Willard Lawson write down such specific warnings. I lay in bed that night listening to the silence, and somewhere in the distance, so faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, I heard the wind moving through the trees. It sounded, just for a moment, like a long, low whistle. I pulled the blanket over my head and forced myself to sleep. My first full day at Pine Hollow started at 5:30 a.m. with the sound of Willard banging on cabin doors. Breakfast was served at 6 in the mess hall: strong coffee, scrambled eggs, biscuits, and sausage gravy. The kind of heavy meal you needed before a day of hard physical labor. There were 4 other loggers at camp. I'd learned their names over the coming days. Marcus, a quiet man in his 50s who'd been working with Willard for years. Beth, one of the few women in the trade, tough as nails and twice as competent. Johnny Price, a loudmouth in his early 40s who seemed to have an opinion about everything. And Dean, a kid fresh out of high school who was clearly still learning the ropes. The conversation that morning was minimal. These were people who'd worked together long enough that they didn't need to fill silence with small talk. I appreciated that. I ate quickly, pulled on my gear, and followed the others out to the equipment shed. Willard assigned me to Section 7, a patch of forest about a mile northwest of camp. Mostly pine, some of it old enough to be valuable, all of it dense enough to make for slow, careful work. He handed me a radio, showed me the section boundaries on a handheld GPS unit, and reminded me, back by 7. No exceptions. Got it, I said. The work itself was familiar. Assess the trees, mark the ones designated for cutting, make precise cuts to control the fall direction, clear the branches, section the trunk. It was hard, methodical, satisfying work. The kind of work where you could lose yourself in the rhythm of it, where the hours passed without you noticing. I worked steadily through the morning and into the afternoon. The forest was beautiful in daylight, shafts of sun breaking through the canopy, the smell of pine sap and earth, the solid thunk of the axe biting into wood. If I ignored the oppressive silence, if I didn't think too hard about those rules, it was almost peaceful. By 6:30 p.m. I was cleaning my tools and preparing to head back. The sun was already low, casting long shadows through the trees. I remembered Rule 5. 7 o'clock. No exceptions. I had 30 minutes, plenty of time. I was loading my pack when I heard it. A whistle. It came from deeper in the forest, from somewhere to the east. A clear, sustained note, rising and falling slightly, almost musical. It sounded exactly like a person whistling to get someone's attention. I froze, my hand halfway to my axe. The whistle came again. Same pitch, same rhythm. Closer now. My first instinct was to call out, to ask if someone needed help. But even as I opened my mouth, Rule 2 flashed through my mind. If you hear a whistle in the night, do not answer. It wasn't quite night yet. The sun was still up, technically. But it was close enough to dusk that the distinction felt meaningless. The whistle sounded a third time. It was definitely closer now, maybe 50 yards away, coming from the direction of the eastern forest. The direction I was explicitly told never to go after dusk. I made a decision. I grabbed my gear, slung my pack over my shoulder, and started walking back toward camp at a brisk pace. Not running. Running would mean I was scared, and I wasn't ready to admit that yet, but moving quickly, purposefully. Behind me the whistle sounded again. Then again. Each time a little louder, a little closer, as if whatever was making the sound was following me. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes on the path ahead, on the GPS unit in my hand showing me the way back to camp. My heart was hammering in my chest, my breath coming faster than the pace of my walking warranted. The whistle echoed through the trees one more time, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I reached camp at 6:52 p.m., according to my watch. Willard was standing outside the mess hall, smoking a cigarette. He looked at me, then at his own watch, then nodded slightly. Good, he said. You follow instructions. I wanted to ask him about the whistle. Wanted to demand an explanation for what I'd heard out there. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just nodded and went to my cabin. That night, lying in bed with the wood stove crackling softly, I heard it again. The whistle. Distant this time, barely audible over the sound of wind in the trees, but unmistakably there. It seemed to be moving around the perimeter of the camp, circling slowly, patiently. I remembered Rule 2. I pulled my pillow over my head and tried to ignore it. But I also remembered that Willard had called these operational guidelines, not superstitions or campfire stories. He presented them as simple facts, the same way you'd tell someone not to touch a hot stove or look directly at the sun. Which meant he believed them. Which meant there was a reason to believe them. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the whistle circle the camp, wondering what kind of place I'd come to work, and whether the money was really worth it. Eventually, exhaustion won. I fell asleep to the sound of that distant, haunting whistle, and I dreamed of dark trees and empty paths stretching on forever. Over the next few days, I settled into the rhythm of camp life. Wake before dawn, eat breakfast with the crew, head out to my assigned section, work until late afternoon, return by 7. The routine was comforting in its predictability, even if the environment itself remained unsettling. I got to know Johnny Price better during this time. He had a habit of sitting next to me at meals, filling the silence with stories and opinions. He'd been at Pine Hollow for 3 years, which made him one of the more experienced hands, and he had the kind of casual confidence that came from familiarity. "You're doing all right," he told me on my 4th day, unprompted. "Most new guys don't last 2 weeks. They get spooked by the atmosphere, by Willard's weird rules, by the isolation. But you seem solid." "Thanks," I said, not sure if it was a compliment or an assessment. "You been following all those rules?" Johnny asked, grinning. "The whistle thing? The 7 o'clock curfew?" "Yeah." "Good boy," he said, and there was something mocking in his tone. "Willard's got everyone trained like dogs. Don't go here, don't do that, be back by this time. It's all bullshit, you know. Old man superstition." I took a bite of my dinner, choosing my words carefully. "The rules seem pretty specific. Like they're based on something." Johnny laughed. "Oh, they're based on something, all right. They're based on Willard being crazy. You know how many strange disappearances this place has supposedly had? According to him, at least a dozen workers have vanished over the years. Just walked into the woods and never came back." He lowered his voice in mock seriousness. "But the truth is, people just quit. They get out here, realize how isolated it is, how hard the work is, and they bail without giving notice. That's all." "What about the whistle?" I asked. "I've heard it. Wind through the trees," Johnny said immediately. "Or some kind of bird. These mountains are full of weird sounds. You start listening to Willard, you'll start seeing ghosts everywhere." I wanted to believe him. It would be easier to believe him. The alternative, that there was something genuinely wrong with this place, something that required a specific set of rules to keep you safe, was too uncomfortable to sit with. "You ever break any of the rules?" I asked. Johnny's grin widened. "All the time. I've been out past 7. I've gone into the eastern forest after dark. I've left my tools wherever the hell I wanted. Nothing happened. Because nothing's going to happen. It's just woods, Tyler. Trees and rocks and animals. That's it." He seemed so sure. So completely convinced of his rationality. And maybe that's why what happened next hit so hard. It was a Thursday, 6 days into my time at Pine Hollow. Johnny and I were assigned to adjacent sections that day, close enough that we ate lunch together, leaning against the same fallen log while we unwrapped sandwiches and drank water from our canteens. "You heading back at the usual time?" Johnny asked. "Yeah. 7 o'clock. He checked his watch. It was already past 6. "I'm gonna stay out a bit later. I found a good stand of oak about half a mile from here. Want to get a few more cuts in before I lose light." "Willard said 7, I reminded him. "Willard says a lot of things." Johnny stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. "Go on back if you want. I'll be fine." I felt a twist of anxiety in my gut. "Johnny man, just come back with me. You can finish tomorrow." "You sound like Beth," he said, laughing. "Look, I appreciate the concern, but I'm a grown man. I can handle myself in the woods after dark. It's not a big deal." I wanted to argue further, but what could I say? That I was worried about a whistle? That I believed in Willard's cryptic rules? Johnny would just laugh at me, and maybe he'd be right too. So I nodded, shouldered my pack, and started the walk back to camp. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see Johnny following behind me, having changed his mind. But the path remained empty. By the time I reached camp at 6:45, the sun was already below the ridgeline, and the forest was swallowing its last light. Willard was in his usual spot, watching the tree line. "Johnny's staying out late," I told him. He wanted to finish a section. Willard's jaw tightened. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "That's his choice. Shouldn't we, I don't know, go get him? Make sure he's okay?" "No," Willard said flatly. "We don't go into the woods after dark. That's the rule." "But Johnny made his choice," Willard repeated. His voice was hard, final. "We all make choices, Tyler. And we live with the consequences." Dinner that night was tense. Marcus and Beth were there along with Dean, but Johnny's seat remained empty. Nobody mentioned him directly, but his absence hung over the meal like smoke. After dinner, I went back to my cabin, but I couldn't settle. I kept checking my watch, kept looking out the window toward the dark tree line, waiting for Johnny to emerge. At 8 o'clock I walked back to the mess hall. Willard was still there, sitting alone drinking coffee. "He's not back," I said. "I know. We should do something." Willard looked at me with tired eyes. "Like what?" "Go look for him. Take flashlights, radios. Form a search party." "We don't go into the woods after dark," Willard said again. "That's the rule." "Fuck the rules," I snapped. "Johnny's out there." Willard set down his coffee cup carefully. Johnny knew the rules. He chose to break them. "There's nothing we can do now except wait until morning. And if something happened to him?" "Then something happened to him," Willard said quietly. "And going out there won't change it. It'll just mean one more person doesn't come back." I stared at him, trying to understand the coldness in his voice, the resignation. He wasn't worried. He wasn't planning a rescue. He was just accepting it. I went back to my cabin, angry and confused and scared. I lay in bed with my clothes on, with my boots still tied, ready to go if I heard anything. Ready to help if Johnny called out. Around midnight I heard the whistle. It was close to camp, maybe just beyond the tree line. The same rising falling tone I'd heard before. It circled slowly, methodically, like something searching. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, every muscle tensed. And then, faintly, I heard a voice. "Tyler? Tyler, man, where are you? I need help." It was Johnny's voice. I was sure of it. I was on my feet, reaching for the door handle before Rule 2 crashed back into my conscious mind. If you hear a whistle in the night, do not answer. But this wasn't a whistle. This was Johnny calling for help. "Tyler. Come on, man. I'm hurt. I can't find the path." My hand was on the door handle. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to go, to help, to not leave a man alone in the dark. But something was wrong. Johnny's voice was flat. The words were right, but the emotion behind them was absent. It was like listening to a recording, or an impression of Johnny rather than Johnny himself. "Tyler. Please." I stepped back from the door. My hands were shaking. "That's not Johnny," I whispered to myself. "That's not him." The voice called my name 3 more times. Each time it sounded more urgent, more desperate. Each time I had to physically stop myself from opening the door. Finally it stopped. The whistle sounded once more, distant now, moving away from camp. Then silence. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on my bed with my back against the wall, watching the door, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally rose, Willard organized a search party. We found Johnny's work site easily enough. His tools were there, his pack, his water bottle. But Johnny himself was gone. We searched for 3 hours, covering a 2-mile radius, calling his name, checking every ravine and hollow. Nothing. It was like he'd simply ceased to exist. We returned to camp just before noon. Willard made some calls on the satellite phone, filed some kind of report. That evening we ate dinner in silence, Johnny's seat still empty. Nobody talked about what happened. Nobody asked questions. But I knew. I knew what I'd heard in the night. And I knew that whatever called out to me in Johnny's voice was not Johnny Price. That night, the whistle came again, circling the camp, patient and eternal. And this time I was certain it knew my name. Johnny's disappearance changed something in me. The easy skepticism I'd arrived with, the willingness to rationalize away the strangeness of Pine Hollow, evaporated completely. I couldn't pretend anymore that this was just an isolated logging camp with eccentric safety rules. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong here. The official story, the one Willard reported to whatever distant authority managed these operations, was that Johnny had gone off-trail and likely fallen into a ravine or suffered some other wilderness accident. His body would probably be found in spring when the snow melted, if at all. Case closed. Just another unfortunate incident in a dangerous profession. But I knew better. I'd heard that voice calling my name. I'd heard how wrong it sounded, how empty. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them from Willard. The mess hall had a small storage closet in the back, the kind of place where old equipment and forgotten supplies ended up. I'd noticed it during my first week but never paid much attention. 3 days after Johnny disappeared, while the others were out working their sections, I found myself standing in front of that closet door. Inside was exactly what you'd expect. Broken tools, spare parts, boxes of old receipts and invoices. But toward the back, stacked on a metal shelf, I found something more interesting. Journals. There were 7 of them, various sizes and conditions, spanning what looked like several decades. Some were professional logbooks, documenting daily production and weather conditions. Others were personal diaries, the kind someone might keep during a long, isolated work assignment. I pulled them down and spread them across the mess hall table. The oldest journal was dated 1987, written by someone named Martin Cross. The early entries were mundane: arrival at camp, learning the work routine, complaints about the food. But 3 weeks in, the tone changed. Something's not right about the eastern section. The trees there are older, darker. Willard won't let anyone work past 5 p.m., and he's added a new rule: don't go near the big oak at the forest's edge after sunset. He won't explain why. Just says it's policy. The other guys seem to accept it, but I think there's more to it. I've heard sounds at night. Whistling, almost like a person. I felt my skin prickle. I turned the pages, skipping ahead. Mike didn't come back yesterday. He was working near the eastern boundary and lost track of time. We found his tools this morning, but no sign of him. Willard barely reacted. It's like he expected it. I asked him what happens to people who stay out too late, and he just looked at me and said, "The forest takes what it needs." What the hell does that mean? The journal ended abruptly a week later. No final entry, no conclusion. Just stopped. I opened the next journal, this one from 1993, written by someone named Catherine Lee. 3rd week here, and I'm already counting the days until my contract ends. This place has a feeling to it, like you're being watched constantly. The rules are specific, too specific to be random superstition. Rule about the whistling especially bothers me. I heard it last night, clear as day, and it sounded exactly like my sister calling my name. But my sister is in San Francisco. When I mentioned it at breakfast, Marcus just shook his head and told me to ignore it. "It's testing you," he said. "Testing me for what?" Further in. Lost another worker. David. He broke Rule 3, left his axe embedded in a tree overnight. When we went to retrieve it the next morning, the axe was gone, and so was David. Willard says David probably just quit without notice, took the axe with him as a souvenir. But David's truck is still here. His clothes are still in his cabin. Where the hell did he go? I went through all 7 journals methodically, taking notes, looking for patterns. The picture that emerged was horrifying in its consistency. Pine Hollow had been losing workers for decades. At least 1 or 2 every year, sometimes more. They all vanished under similar circumstances, staying out too late, breaking one of the rules, ignoring the warnings. Sometimes their bodies were eventually found, months or years later, deep in the forest where they had no reason to be. But more often they simply disappeared completely, leaving behind only their tools and belongings. And the whistle. Every single journal mentioned the whistle. Described it the same way, a clear, sustained tone that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Several people reported hearing voices alongside the whistle, voices of people they knew, calling them into the forest. One journal, dated 2003, had an entry that made my blood run cold. I figured out what the whistle is. It's not a sound made by wind or animals. It's made by something that lives in the forest, something old and patient. It learns voices. It learns names. It calls people out into the dark, and when they answer, when they go to help, it takes them. Willard knows this. He's known it for years. The rules aren't guidelines, they're a containment protocol. We're not logging this forest. We're feeding it. I sat back, my hands shaking slightly. Feeding it? As if the forest itself was a living thing, something that required sustenance, and the logging company was providing that sustenance in the form of workers who didn't follow the rules. That couldn't be right. That was insane. But Johnny was gone. And according to these journals, at least 30 other people had vanished from this camp over the decades. I heard footsteps outside and quickly gathered up the journals, shoving them back into the storage closet. Willard came through the door a moment later, his eyes moving immediately to me, then to the closet, then back to me. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked quietly. There was no point in lying. "I read the journals." Willard nodded slowly. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove, took a long drink and sat down across from me. "Then you know," he said. "Know what? That this place kills people? That you've been letting it happen for years?" "I haven't been letting anything happen," Willard said, his voice hard. "I've been keeping it contained. Those rules aren't arbitrary, Tyler. They're the result of decades of trial and error, of learning what works and what doesn't. Follow them and you're safe. Break them and—" He gestured vaguely at the empty space where Johnny used to sit. "What is it?" I demanded. "What's out there?" Willard was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired, resigned. "I don't know exactly. Nobody does. It's been here longer than this camp, longer than the logging operation, maybe longer than people have been in these mountains. The locals have stories about it going back generations. They call it different things, the old hollow, the breathing woods, the thing in the trees. But it all comes down to the same thing. There's something in that eastern forest that doesn't want to be disturbed. And if you disturb it anyway, if you ignore the warnings and the rules, it comes for you. And you just work around it? You bring people up here and let them get taken? Nobody gets taken unless they break the rules, Willard said firmly. I make the rules clear from day one. Everyone signs the agreement. Everyone acknowledges understanding. What happens after that is their own choice. Johnny didn't choose to die. Johnny chose not to follow the rules, Willard countered. That was his choice. And yes, I wish he'd made a different one. But I'm not going to risk other people trying to save someone who put themselves in danger deliberately. I wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at Willard's cold pragmatism. But underneath the anger was a deeper fear. Because what he was saying made a terrible kind of sense. If something in the forest really was that dangerous, if breaking the rules really did get people killed, then the logical response was to follow the rules absolutely, without exception. Why not just shut down the operation? I asked. Why keep working here at all? Willard laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think this is the only place like this? You think Pine Hollow is unique? There are places all over these mountains, all over the world probably, where the old things still live. Where the forest isn't just trees and animals but something else. Something aware. Most companies don't know. They send crews out to harvest timber, and those crews report strange incidents, disappearances, accidents. The company writes it off as occupational hazards and moves on. But a few operations, the ones that have been around long enough, the ones run by people who've seen enough. We know better. We know what's out there. And we work around it. That's insane. That's survival, Willard corrected. You wanted answers, Tyler. Now you have them. So the question is, what are you going to do with them? I didn't have an answer. I sat there, staring at the table, trying to process everything I'd learned. My advice. Willard stood, draining the last of his coffee. Stop asking questions. Do your work. Follow the rules. When your contract is up, leave and don't come back. That's the best outcome for everyone. He left me alone in the mess hall, surrounded by the weight of decades of disappeared workers, of cryptic journal entries, of a mystery I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. That night, I lay awake in my cabin, listening to the silence of the forest. The whistle didn't come. Nothing called my name. But somehow, the absence of sound was worse than the presence of it. Because now I knew what I was listening for. And I knew it was listening back. I met Olivia Reynolds on a gray Saturday morning, exactly 2 weeks after Johnny disappeared. She drove into camp in a battered pickup truck, the bed loaded with supplies, crates of canned goods, fresh vegetables, bread, and cases of bottled water. She made the supply run once a week, Willard had told me, bringing provisions from the nearest town 40 miles away. She was probably in her mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. She moved with the efficient economy of someone who'd done hard work their entire life. I helped her unload the truck, carrying crates into the mess hall storage while she checked items off a list on a clipboard. We worked in comfortable silence for several minutes before she spoke. "You're the new one," she said. It wasn't a question. "Tyler Bishop. Been here about 2 weeks. I know. Willard mentioned you." She set down a crate of potatoes and looked at me directly. "How are you holding up?" It was such a normal question, asked with such genuine concern, that I almost laughed. Managing. You heard about Johnny? I was here when it happened." Olivia nodded, unsurprised. "And you're still here. That's something. Most people who see what happens, they leave. Break contract, lose their deposit, don't care. They just want out." I thought about it, I admitted. "But I need the money. And..." I hesitated. "And I want to understand what's happening here. What this place is." Olivia studied me for a long moment. Then she gestured toward the mess hall table. "Take a break. I'll make coffee." 10 minutes later, we sat across from each other with steaming mugs, the door closed against the cold morning air. Olivia wrapped her hands around her cup and seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "What has Willard told you?" she asked. "That there's something in the forest. Something old. That the rules are there to protect us from it." That's the simplified version, but it's not wrong. She took a sip of coffee. "My family has lived in these mountains for 6 generations. We know things that don't make it into any history books. Stories that get passed down, parent to child, about the places you don't go and the things you don't do." "Stories about Pine Hollow?" "Stories about the eastern forest," she corrected. "Pine Hollow is just one name for it. It's been called other things over the years. But the warning is always the same: don't go into the old growth after dark. Don't answer when you hear voices calling. Don't disturb the hollow tree. The hollow tree, I repeated, remembering the phrase from one of the journals. What is that? Olivia set down her coffee cup. About 3 miles into the eastern forest, there's an oak tree. Sold, probably 400-500 years, maybe more. Massive trunk, branches that spread out like cathedral arches. And it's hollow. Not like it's rotting or dying. Like it was always meant to be hollow. Like that's its purpose. A hollow tree, I said. That's not that unusual. Old trees decay from the inside. This one's different. Olivia's voice was quiet, serious. The hollow goes deep. Deeper than it should, deeper than makes sense. And if you get too close, especially after dark, you hear things. Voices. Whispers. People you've lost, people you miss, calling you to come closer, to come inside, to see them again. A chill ran down my spine. What happens if you go inside? You don't come out, she said simply. Or if you do, you're not yourself anymore. My grandfather told me about a man from his generation who went into the hollow tree looking for his brother. He came out 3 days later, walking straight and normal, came back to town, went to his house. But his wife said he wasn't right. He moved wrong, talked wrong, looked at her with eyes that didn't recognize her. He lasted a week before he walked back into the forest and never came out again. I struggled for words. That sounds like a campfire story. An urban legend. It does, Olivia agreed. And maybe that's all it is. But I grew up in these mountains, Tyler. I've seen things I can't explain. I've heard the whistle on still nights. I've watched people go into that forest confident and rational, and I've watched them come out changed, if they come out at all. She leaned forward. The trees here aren't just trees. The forest breathes. It listens. And it takes what it needs. I thought about the journals, about the consistent pattern of disappearances, about Johnny's voice calling my name in the darkness. Why? I asked. If this thing is so dangerous, why does anyone work here? Why does Willard keep the camp open? Because the hollow tree doesn't take everyone, Olivia said. It takes the ones who break the rules, who push boundaries, who refuse to listen. It's like a test. Or a toll. Follow the guidelines, respect the boundaries, and you can work here safely. But cross the line and you're the price. That's barbaric. It's nature, she corrected. Not the nature you learned about in school, but a deeper kind. The kind that existed before we built cities and highways, before we decided we were the top of the food chain. This forest remembers what we've forgotten, that there are older things than us, and they don't care about our logic or our rules or our understanding of how the world works. She finished her coffee and stood, the conversation apparently over. I'm telling you this because you seem like someone who wants to survive, she said. So here's my advice. Follow the rules. All of them. Don't test them, don't try to find loopholes, don't convince yourself you know better. Willard's rules exist because they work. They've kept people alive for decades. Trust them. And if I want to leave? Then leave, Olivia said simply. Break your contract, lose your money, go back to whatever life you had before. Nobody will blame you. But if you stay, if you keep working here, then commit to it completely. Half measures will get you killed. She headed toward the door, then paused and looked back at me. One more thing. If you ever hear your name called from the forest, especially in a voice you recognize, remember, the dead don't need help finding their way. And the living shouldn't try to follow them. She left before I could respond, climbing into her truck and driving away down the narrow mountain road. I sat alone in the mess hall for a long time after she was gone, thinking about hollow trees and voices in the dark, about forests that breathed and listened and remembered. That night, I pulled out the list of rules and read them again, one by one, committing each to memory not just as words but as gospel truth. Rule 1. Never go into the eastern forest after dusk. Rule 2. If you hear a whistle in the night, do not answer. Rule 3. Always clear your axe at the end of the day, do not leave it hanging from a tree. Rule 4. If a tree falls without a sound, leave the area immediately. Rule 5. You must return to the camp by 7 p.m. No exceptions. I thought about Johnny, about how casually he'd dismissed these rules, how confident he'd been in his rationality. And I promised myself that I would never make the same mistake. Whatever was out there in the eastern forest, whatever lived in the hollow tree, I would respect it. I would follow the rules. I would survive. 3 weeks passed. The rhythm of work continued. Wake, eat, log, return. I followed the rules meticulously, almost obsessively. I was always back at camp by 6:45, giving myself a 15-minute buffer. I kept my tools clean and stored properly. I never responded to sounds in the night, no matter how convincing they seemed. The whistle still came occasionally, circling the camp like a predator testing for weakness. But it never found one in me. I stayed inside, I stayed quiet, I stayed alive. The work itself became almost meditative. There was something satisfying about the pure physicality of it, the way you could lose yourself in the swing of the axe, the assessment of each tree, the mathematical precision of planning a fall. In those hours of daylight, with the sun filtering through the canopy and the smell of pine sap in the air, I could almost forget where I was. Almost. It was a Thursday afternoon, late October, when everything changed. I was working my usual section, making good progress on a stand of mature pines that Willard had marked for harvest. The day was colder than usual, with thick clouds overhead threatening rain. I checked my watch frequently, aware that the cloud cover would make dusk come earlier. At 5:30 I started packing up for the day. Plenty of time to make it back to camp before 7, but I'd learned to err on the side of caution. I was coiling my rope when I heard it. Crack. Sharp and loud, echoing through the forest. The sound of a tree breaking. I froze listening. Another crack, followed by a long, sustained creaking, the sound of wood under tremendous stress. A tree was falling and it was close. I grabbed my gear and started moving away from the sound, putting distance between myself and whatever was coming down. Trees could kill you if you were in the wrong place when they fell. I'd seen it happen once years ago and I never wanted to see it again. But then I noticed something wrong. The creaking had stopped. The sound of the tree breaking, of it beginning its fall, had simply ceased. Silence. I stood perfectly still, my heart rate accelerating, Rule 4 screaming in my mind. If a tree falls without a sound, leave the area immediately. But the tree hadn't fallen yet. It had started to fall and then, what? Stopped midair? I knew I should leave. Every instinct, every ounce of training from the past 3 weeks, told me to turn around and head straight back to camp. Don't investigate. Don't be curious. Follow the rules. But I couldn't stop myself. I needed to see. I moved slowly through the forest, following the direction the sound had come from, my eyes scanning the canopy. And then I saw it. There was a tree lying on the ground. It was a massive oak, probably 80 feet tall, its trunk thick enough that 3 men couldn't have encircled it with linked arms. It lay across the forest floor, branches splayed out, roots exposed where it had torn free from the earth. But there was no disturbance around it. No torn earth at its base. No broken branches where it should have crashed through the canopy. No scattered debris. It was simply there. As if it had been placed gently on the ground by some enormous hand. And I hadn't heard it land. The silence pressed in around me, thick and oppressive. I took a step backward, then another, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. Trees didn't fall silently. Physics didn't work that way. A tree that size would have hit the ground with a thunderous impact, would have shaken the earth, would have. The whistle cut through the silence like a knife. It was close. Much closer than I'd ever heard it before. Maybe 50 feet away, coming from the direction of the fallen tree. I turned to run, but something moved in my peripheral vision. I turned my head and my blood turned to ice. There was a figure standing near the tree. It was tall, impossibly tall, at least 7 feet. Its limbs were too long, its proportions wrong, like someone had stretched a human form on a rack. It wore what looked like clothes, dark fabric, torn and weathered, but they hung on its frame in a way that suggested the thing underneath wasn't shaped quite right. Its head turned toward me and I saw its face. It was Johnny. Or it had been Johnny. It had Johnny's features, Johnny's hairline, Johnny's day-old stubble. But the skin was pale, almost gray, and the eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris, just pools of darkness that reflected no light. Tyler, it said, and the voice was Johnny's voice but flattened, emotionless. Why did you leave me? I needed help. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but I was frozen, locked in place by the absolute wrongness of what I was seeing. The thing that looked like Johnny took a step toward me, its movement jerky and strange like a puppet being manipulated by an inexperienced hand. Come with me, it said. We're still working. There's more to cut. More to harvest. Come with me into the forest. The whistle sounded again, and this time it seemed to be coming from the thing's throat, even though its mouth wasn't moving. Something inside me broke free of the paralysis. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard the thing start to follow, its footsteps crashing through the underbrush. But the sounds were wrong, too rhythmic, too mechanical, like a recording of footsteps rather than actual movement. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, my pack bouncing against my back, branches tearing at my face and clothes. I didn't look back. Couldn't look back. The whistle followed me, seeming to come from all directions at once. And underneath it I heard voices. Multiple voices all calling my name. Tyler. Tyler, wait. Tyler, come back. Tyler, help me. Some of them I recognized. Johnny. Martin Cross from the 1987 Journal. Catherine Lee. Others were strangers, but all of them spoke with the same flat effect, the same empty urgency. I burst out of the tree line and kept running across the open ground toward the camp, toward the lights I could see in the distance. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of red and gold that looked more like blood than beauty. I reached the camp at 6:53 according to my watch. 7 minutes to spare. Willard was there standing outside the mess hall. He took one look at my face, at the way I was breathing, and nodded slowly. You saw it, he said. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. But you didn't answer it. You didn't follow it. I shook my head. Good, Willard said. Then you'll live another day. He turned and walked inside, leaving me standing there in the fading light, listening to the forest behind me, listening to the whistle that still echoed through the trees, listening to the voices of the dead calling my name. That night I didn't sleep at all. I sat on my bed with my back against the wall, watching the door, watching the window, waiting for something to try to get in. It never did. But I knew with absolute certainty that I'd crossed a threshold. I'd seen the thing that lived in the forest. I'd seen what it could do, how it could wear the faces of the people it had taken. And I knew that sooner or later it would try again. The encounter with the Johnny thing changed me. For 3 days afterward, I couldn't shake the image of that tall figure, those black eyes, that flat voice using Johnny's words. I threw myself into work with manic intensity, trying to exhaust myself enough that I could sleep without dreaming. It didn't work. Every night, I dreamed of the hollow tree, though I'd never seen it. In my dreams, I walked toward it through endless dark forest, drawn by voices I recognized, my mother, my brother, friends from childhood. And always, just as I reached the massive oak with its cathedral branches and its hollow core, I would wake up gasping, drenched in sweat. On the 4th day after the incident, Willard approached me during breakfast. We need to talk, he said quietly. My office. After you eat. I nodded, my stomach suddenly too tight to accept more food. I pushed my plate away and followed him across the compound. His office was cold, the propane heater struggling against the October chill. Willard sat behind his desk, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked old, not just weathered but genuinely old, worn down by something more than just years. What you saw out there, he began, the thing wearing Johnny's face. That's not the worst of it. There's something worse? I asked, my voice sounding hollow. The hollow tree, Willard said. It's the source. The center. Everything else, the whistle, the voices, the things that wear familiar faces, they're just extensions of it. Tendrils, you could say. But the tree itself is the heart of the forest. Olivia told me about it. Did she tell you that it's been getting stronger? I shook my head. Willard pulled out a folder, spreading yellowed documents across his desk. They were reports, dating back decades, documenting incidents at Pine Hollow. I recognized some of the names from the journals I'd read. Every person it takes makes it stronger, Willard explained. Every time someone breaks the rules, every time someone gets taken into the eastern forest, the hollow tree's influence expands. When I started working here 30 years ago, the safe zone extended almost 2 miles into the eastern section. Now it's less than half a mile. The boundary is contracting. The rules that used to keep people safe are becoming less effective. So what are you saying? I asked, though I thought I already knew. I'm saying it's calling to you specifically now, Willard said, meeting my eyes. You saw it. You ran from it. And now it knows you're aware. That makes you a target. What do I do? Willard was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. There are 2 options. First, you leave. Tonight. Break your contract, pack your things, and get as far from this mountain as you can. The hollow tree's influence doesn't extend much beyond the immediate forest. Once you're out of range, you should be safe. And the second option? You face it. You go to the hollow tree, you confront what's there, and you end your connection to it. How? By refusing it completely. By standing at its base and denying its call, no matter what it shows you or says to you or promises you. By proving that you can't be taken. I stared at him. That sounds like suicide. It might be, Willard admitted. But it's also the only way to truly be free of it. Because once it's marked you, once you've seen it and run from it, it won't stop. Not really. You might leave this mountain, go back to civilization, build a new life. But you'll always hear the whistle. You'll always see shadows that aren't quite right. And one day, maybe 10 years from now, maybe 20, you'll follow those shadows into the woods somewhere, and they'll lead you back here. You're saying I have to go into the eastern forest. The same forest everyone's been telling me to avoid. After dusk, Willard added. Because that's when the hollow tree is most active. Most powerful. If you're going to face it, you have to face it at its strongest. This is insane. Yes, Willard agreed. But so is everything else about this place. Tyler, I won't force you to do this. I won't even recommend it. But I'm telling you what I know, what I've learned from 3 decades of watching people come and go from this camp. The ones who run never really escape. But the ones who face it, the very few who've actually gone to the hollow tree and come back, they're free. How many have come back? Willard's silence was answer enough. I left his office in a daze, went through the motions of the workday, came back to camp as the sun set. That night, I sat in my cabin and tried to decide which kind of coward I wanted to be, the kind who ran away or the kind who did nothing and hoped the problem would solve itself. Around midnight there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Olivia standing there, along with Marcus and Beth. They looked grim, prepared. Willard told us, Olivia said. If you're going to do this, you're not going alone. You'd come with me? Into the eastern forest? Someone has to bear witness, Marcus said. His voice was rough, like he didn't talk often. Someone has to see you make it to the tree and back. And if I don't make it back? Then we make sure no one else ends up in your situation, Beth said simply. We burn the camp and close the operation. No more feeding the forest. I looked at the 3 of them, these people who'd chosen to work at Pine Hollow despite knowing what it was, who'd lived with the rules and the fear and the disappearances. They were offering to risk their lives to help me, a relative stranger. Why? I asked. Because someone did it for me once, Olivia said quietly. And because this has to end eventually. One way or another. We left at 1 a.m., when the moon was high and provided at least some light to see by. Willard watched us go from the mess hall steps, his expression unreadable. We walked east into the forest I'd been avoiding since my first day. The trees here were different. Older, darker, their trunks massive and their branches interwoven overhead like a net designed to trap the sky. The silence was absolute, oppressive, the kind of silence that made you acutely aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing. We walked for what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes. And then, ahead I saw it. The hollow tree. It was everything Olivia had described and more. The trunk was enormous, easily 20 feet in diameter, its bark black with age. The branches spread out in perfect geometric patterns like veins in a leaf, like neurons in a brain. And at its base was an opening, not a hole where the wood had rotted away, but a deliberate space, smooth-edged and dark, leading down into the earth. As we approached, I heard the whistle. It started soft, distant, but grew rapidly in volume. Within seconds, it was deafening, coming from everywhere at once, vibrating in my chest, in my skull, in my bones. And then came the voices. Tyler. My mother's voice, exact in every detail. I turned, and she was there, standing just inside the tree line, looking exactly as she had the last time I'd seen her, 2 years before she died. Tyler, baby, I've missed you so much. Come here. Come give me a hug. It's not real, I whispered, but my feet were already moving toward her. Olivia grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. Eyes on the tree. Only the tree. I forced myself to look away from my mother's face, to focus on the massive oak ahead of us. More figures appeared. My brother, who died in a car accident when I was 16. My first girlfriend. Johnny Price. Martin Cross. Dozens of people, some I recognized, others I didn't. They stood in a loose circle around the tree, calling my name, beckoning me closer. Focus, Marcus said from my other side. They're not real. They're what it thinks you want to see. We reached the base of the tree. Up close, the opening was even more disturbing, perfectly circular, perfectly smooth, leading down into darkness that no flashlight could penetrate. Now what? I asked, my voice barely audible over the whistle and the voices. Now you refuse it, Olivia said. Look at the tree. Tell it you won't come. Tell it you choose to live. I stepped forward, right to the edge of the opening. The darkness inside seemed to move, to breathe. I could hear things down there, not voices exactly, but something older, deeper, more fundamental. The sound of roots growing, of earth shifting, of time itself moving forward. And I could feel the pull. The desire to step forward, to drop down into that darkness, to join whatever existed at the bottom of the hollow tree. Would be so easy. One step and all of this, the fear, the uncertainty, the constant vigilance, would be over. Tyler, my mother said behind me, don't you want to be with us? Don't you want to come home? I turned and looked at her, at the thing wearing her face. Its eyes were black, just like the Johnny thing's eyes had been. Empty. Hungry. "You're not my mother," I said. It smiled, and the smile was wrong, stretching too wide, revealing too many teeth. "Does it matter?" it asked in my mother's voice. "I can be anything you want. Anyone you miss. We can all be here together, forever, in the heart of the forest. Isn't that what you want? Connection? Belonging?" "No," I said, and my voice was stronger than I expected. "I want to live. I want to leave this mountain and never come back. I want to forget this place exists." The figures around the tree began to move closer, their circle contracting. "You can't leave," said the thing wearing Johnny's face. "You've seen us. You know we're real. You'll carry us with you wherever you go." "Maybe," I said. "But I'm still leaving." I turned back to the tree, to that perfect circular opening, and I spoke directly to whatever was listening from inside. "I know what you are. I know what you do. And I'm telling you that you can't have me. I'm not coming into your tree. I'm not breaking the rules. I'm not giving you permission to take me. I refuse." The whistle grew deafening, so loud I thought my eardrums would burst. The figures rushed forward, their hands reaching for me, their voices screaming my name. And then Olivia was pulling me backward, Marcus and Beth flanking us, and we were running, crashing back through the forest the way we'd come. Behind us, the hollow tree hummed with rage or hunger, or something else that had no name in human language. We ran until we broke out of the eastern forest into the familiar territory near camp. The whistle faded. The voices stopped. We made it back to camp at 4:30 a.m., just as the first hints of dawn were touching the sky. Willard was still waiting on the mess hall steps. He looked at me, at my face, and nodded once. "You did it," he said. "You faced it and came back." I collapsed on the steps next to him, my entire body shaking with exhaustion and residual terror. "Is it over?" I asked. "For you? Maybe. For this place." He looked toward the eastern forest. "It's never over. But you've bought yourself freedom. That counts for something." As the sun rose over Pine Hollow, I sat with the others and watched the forest lighten from black to gray to green. Somewhere in there, 3 miles in, the hollow tree stood silent and patient, waiting for the next person who would break the rules. But that person wouldn't be me. I finished out my contract at Pine Hollow. 4 more weeks of work, each day an exercise in careful vigilance, each night a test of nerve. The whistle still came occasionally, but it was distant now, less insistent. The voices no longer called my name. Whatever presence lived in the eastern forest had accepted my refusal, or at least moved on to easier targets. Olivia told me that was normal. "You drew a line," she said. "You proved you couldn't be taken easily. It respects that in its own way. Like a predator that decides a particular prey isn't worth the effort." But respect didn't mean forgetting. I still dreamed of the hollow tree. Still woke in the middle of the night with the sensation of falling, of descending into that perfect circular darkness, of being swallowed by something ancient and hungry. The others treated me differently after that night. Marcus nodded to me in the mornings. Beth sat next to me at meals and told stories about her years working remote logging camps. Even Willard seemed to soften slightly, though he remained as taciturn as ever. On my last day, I packed my belongings into my truck, said goodbye to the crew and prepared to leave. Willard walked me to my vehicle. "You did good work here," he said. "Better than most." "Thanks. If you ever need a reference, call the number on your contract. I'll vouch for you." I nodded, then hesitated. "Willard, why do you stay? Why keep running this operation when you know what's out there?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking past me toward the eastern forest. "Because someone has to," he finally said. "If we close this camp, another operation will just open somewhere else. And they won't know the rules. They won't know what they're dealing with. At least here I can control things. I can keep the rules in place. I can minimize the damage." It cost Johnny his life. How many others? "Too many," Willard admitted. "But it would cost more if I wasn't here." I couldn't argue with that logic, grim as it was. I shook his hand, climbed into my truck, and drove away from Pine Hollow. The drive down the mountain took 3 hours. With each mile, I felt something lifting off my shoulders, some weight I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying. The sense of being watched, of being evaluated, began to fade. But it didn't disappear completely. I settled back into something resembling a normal life. I found work at a mill in North Carolina, closer to my family, in a town with streetlights and grocery stores and cell phone reception. I dated a woman named Sarah who knew nothing about Pine Hollow and whom I had no intention of telling. I bought a small house with a yard, adopted a dog, tried to rebuild the routine I'd lost when Thornton Mill shut down. But the forest followed me in small ways. I couldn't go hiking without feeling a tightness in my chest, an awareness of the tree line, an instinctive calculation of how long until darkness. I heard whistles everywhere, in the wind and car alarms, in the way certain doors creaked. None of them were the real thing, but each one made my heart rate spike. And sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I would go to my window and look out at the trees near my house. Ordinary oaks and maples, probably less than 50 years old, and I would see shapes moving between them that couldn't quite be shadows. 6 months after I left Pine Hollow, I received a letter. It had no return address, but I recognized Olivia's handwriting. Tyler. Thought you should know, we finally shut down the Pine Hollow operation. Willard retired, and the company decided it wasn't worth keeping the camp open without him. The equipment has been removed, the cabins cleared out. The forest is reclaiming the space. Marcus and Beth moved on to other jobs. I'm still making supply runs to other camps in the area, still keeping an eye on things. The eastern forest is still there, of course. The hollow tree still stands. But without people breaking the rules, without new workers feeding it, maybe it will finally sleep again. Maybe it will go quiet. I hope you're doing well. I hope you found peace, or at least something close to it. Remember the rules. Even if you never go back to the mountains, remember them. Olivia. I kept the letter in a drawer by my bed. Sometimes I took it out and reread it, reminding myself that Pine Hollow was real, that it all actually happened, that I didn't imagine the whole nightmare. The rules were still taped to my bathroom mirror, the same sheet Willard had given me on my first day. Rule 1. Never go into the eastern forest after dusk. Rule 2. If you hear a whistle in the night, do not answer. Rule 3. Always clear your axe at the end of the day, do not leave it hanging from a tree. Rule 4. If a tree falls without a sound, leave the area immediately. Rule 5. You must return to the camp by 7 p.m. No exceptions. I followed them still, adapted to civilian life. I didn't go into forests after dark. I ignored strange sounds. I kept my tools properly stored. I came home before it got late. The rules had been written to keep people alive in a specific, terrible place. But they worked anywhere I found. They were guidelines for respecting boundaries, for recognizing when something wasn't right, for prioritizing survival over curiosity. They were lessons I would carry for the rest of my life. 1 year after leaving Pine Hollow, I went to visit my mother's grave. It was in a small cemetery in Tennessee, surrounded by woods, normal woods where nothing hunted, where trees didn't breathe, where the dead stayed properly dead. Or so I thought. As I stood by her headstone placing fresh flowers, I heard it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. The whistle. I froze, my hand still on the flowers. The sound came again, moving through the trees at the edge of the cemetery. And then I heard my mother's voice. Tyler? Tyler, is that you? Every muscle in my body locked up. Rule 2 screamed in my mind, if you hear a whistle in the night, do not answer. But it wasn't night. It was 3 in the afternoon, sun high and bright. Tyler, baby, come here. I want to talk to you. The voice was perfect. Not the flat, emotionless imitation the thing at the hollow tree had used, but my actual mother's voice, with all its warmth and personality intact. I took a step toward the tree line. Then I stopped. No, this was a test. Another test, maybe the final one. The forest hadn't forgotten me. The hollow tree's influence reached farther than anyone had thought. Or maybe something else had learned the trick, had learned how to call people using the voices of the dead. It didn't matter. What mattered was the choice. I turned away from the voice, from my mother's grave, and walked back to my car. Behind me the whistle came again, insistent now, almost angry. Tyler. Don't walk away from me. I kept walking. Tyler. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the cemetery. Tall, too tall, with proportions that weren't quite right. It watched me go, motionless, patient. I didn't go back to that cemetery. I had my mother's grave moved to a different location, one surrounded by open fields instead of forest. I told myself it was because the old location was hard to get to, but I knew the real reason. The forest remembered me, and it would never truly let me go. But I also knew that as long as I followed the rules, as long as I refused to answer when it called, I would survive. That was the price of having seen what I'd seen, of knowing what I knew. I would spend the rest of my life aware that there were places in the world where the old things still lived, where human rules didn't apply, where the forest breathed and listened and remembered. And I would spend the rest of my life making sure I never broke the rules that kept those things at bay. Because some lessons are learned in blood and terror. And those lessons, once learned, can never be forgotten. Brad Morrison pulled his truck into Pine Hollow on a crisp November morning, 2 years after Tyler Bishop had driven away. He was 26 years old, fresh off a bad breakup and a worse layoff, looking for a fresh start somewhere remote where he could clear his head and make some money. The job listing had been vague: remote logging work, good pay, housing provided. The location was listed only as Appalachian region. But Brad had been desperate, and when the old man on the phone, someone named Lawson, offered him the job after a 10-minute conversation, he'd said yes immediately. The camp was smaller than Brad had expected, and it looked abandoned. There were 5 cabins arranged in a semicircle, a larger mess hall building and various equipment sheds. But the windows were dark, the grounds overgrown, and there were no other vehicles in sight. Brad parked and got out, confused. Had he gotten the date wrong? The address? Then he saw the man standing outside the mess hall. He was probably in his late 60s, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots, his face weathered by decades of outdoor work. But there was something else in his expression, something tired, resigned, like he'd done this too many times before. "Brad Morrison?" the man asked. "Yeah. Are you Lawson?" "I am. Willard Lawson." "Come on, let's get your paperwork sorted." The office was cold and dusty. Willard pulled out standard employment documents, contract, tax forms, safety waivers. Brad signed them quickly, eager to get started. Then Willard pulled out one more sheet of paper. It was slightly yellowed with typewritten text. At the top, operational guidelines. "One more thing," Willard said. "Rules. You follow these, you'll do fine. Break them and you're on your own." Brad scanned the list. Rule 1. Never go into the eastern forest after dusk. Rule 2. If you hear a whistle in the night, do not answer. Rule 3. Always clear your axe at the end of the day, do not leave it hanging from a tree. Rule 4. If a tree falls without a sound, leave the area immediately. Rule 5. You must return to the camp by 7 p.m. No exceptions. Brad laughed. Is this a joke? Some kind of hazing thing? Willard didn't smile. No. Come on, these are pretty weird. If you hear a whistle? If a tree falls without a sound? What does that even mean? It means follow the rules, Willard said flatly. Sign the paper or don't take the job. Your choice. Brad almost walked out. The whole thing had a weird vibe, the abandoned-looking camp, the old man's grim attitude, the bizarre rules. But he thought about his empty bank account, his maxed-out credit cards, the 6 months of unemployment stretching behind him. He signed the paper. Willard showed him to cabin 3, gave him a quick orientation and left him to settle in. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Brad stood on the cabin's small porch and listened to the silence of the forest. It was peaceful, he thought. Exactly the kind of quiet he'd been looking for. Somewhere in the distance, so faint he almost missed it, he heard a sound. A whistle. Long and sustained, rising and falling slightly. Brad tilted his head, listening. It sounded like someone was out there, maybe another worker trying to get his attention. Should he call back? Let them know someone was here? He opened his mouth to respond, then remembered Rule 2. If you hear a whistle in the night, do not answer. He laughed to himself. Ridiculous. It was probably just whine through the trees or some kind of bird. Nothing to worry about. The whistle came again, closer this time. Brad went inside, lit the wood stove, and tried to ignore the tightness in his chest, the way the silence seemed to press in around him. He told himself it was just his imagination. Just the isolation getting to him. Tomorrow he'd start work and everything would make sense. The whistle circled the cabin slowly, patiently, like something that had all the time in the world. And deep in the eastern forest, 3 miles into the darkness, the hollow tree waited. Was always waiting. Because someone always breaks the rules.